Thank you so much for joining us for this episode of Leading Change. I'm Ema Roloff, and I've got Bryan with me here today. And we're going to be talking about the relationship and partnerships between insurance carriers and InsureTech companies. But before I get to the questions that I've got for you, Bryan, can you give everybody an introduction?
Yeah. So I'm Bryan Falchuk. Like you said, I'm an insurance veteran. I've been in P&C since 2000, so 20 something years, and been really lucky to have worked different carriers, consulted for different carriers, worked in InsureTech for a while. And for the past few years, I've been kind of helping the industry as a whole, working with different InsureTechs and carriers on the change and the opportunity. And I use the word disruption, but that creates so many new pockets of growth and potential for us, and just how do we navigate that? So that's what I've been focusing on, is trying to help the industry kind of move itself forward and engage in some of these new opportunities that new technologies or painful things going on outside in the world actually end up creating for us, so we can do something different and better. That's me in a nutshell.
Great. So I want to get started. For anybody that hasn't watched one of our collaborations before, this is not our first rodeo. Bryan and I have done a couple of interviews together focused on where I want to take this first question. So through your books, as well as like speaking engagements and all that kind of thing, you have taken a close look at both the carrier side of this equation as well as what it's like to get an InsureTech started.
Yeah.
Can you give us a little bit of a high-level overview of some of the insights that came from both book one and book two to give us the background of why you're so passionate about this idea?
Yeah, and to be fair, it's what I've lived throughout my career. Is insurance is an industry that, as much as people make fun of it, it's incredibly important. And I think if we remember why we exist as an industry, it's easy to get excited again and re-engage in what we do. And that's the place my books come from. Is there's all kinds of barriers and complications that we all face: regulation, budget constraints, IT projects that haven't worked out, legacy tech, like whatever it is, everyone faces these mountains in front of us. Yet we're really important. We keep people's lives possible, like for people to pursue their dreams, to buy a house, to start a business. And when things go wrong, we put the world back together. And if you really think about it, nothing in the global economy happens without insurance behind it somewhere. And that's a great purpose if you really think through it. So we can't just stop when we hit these mountains or these headwinds. We need to find a path forward. And I've been working with different carriers and profiling how have they done it despite the barriers they face. How have they done something innovative, something new, something to move forward for themselves, and really, I think, set the stage for the industry, and then trying to pull those lessons out. So I put out 2 books so far, and there's another one in the works. But looking, the first book's all legacy carriers and second's all startups. So very different perspectives, yet the lessons that I pulled from how they've moved forward are actually really universal. And it's things like engaging your customers. So I think we all learned that lesson through COVID, is that customer experience and hearing from them firsthand is incredibly important. But that was loud and true for the incumbents as well as for the startups. And some of the lessons for the startups is, how do you think strategically about your capacity? And that could, or your capital, that could be the capacity you have, whether that's fronting capacity, reinsurance capacity, your own capital base. It could be investment capacity or capital. What enables your ability to innovate and to move forward on your dream and to make those things possible? Now, people think you say capital, that's really just a startup story, but every legacy carrier has a capital discussion as well, whether it's their own or their reinsurers. Capital is the lifeblood of this industry. So how you're managing your relationship with your capital providers, how much they're engaged in your objectives strategically versus what kind of wall have you put up, and are you keeping a tight relationship with them or not? And I talked through lots of examples on either side of the fence on that, and the ramifications, both good and bad. So there's a number of stories across both books, but that's almost not enough. As much as you might want to move ahead, the reality is we all need partners. We all need other companies to support us, to lean on, to use their solutions. Or for those companies, we need insurers to sell into, to put those solutions to play in the market. And the way that we engage collaboratively, that became this really important force. And again, that's something I lived firsthand when I was on the carrier side running a claims organization. We depended on our attorneys that we worked with and our adjusters, outsourced adjusters and solution providers and all sorts of other things. And as an InsureTech, and my role was on the growth side, which means sales. So I'm meeting with carriers and trying to figure out, how do we get them to understand the benefits here and put something into play and get it to market. Especially for a startup, you're always looking at your runway. And so it's not just we want to close the sale. It's like we have to. Our survival depends on it. But also, if we think we're really going to move the market forward, we need to get live and start to have an impact. And so how can we do that better, faster, more efficiently, and have an even greater impact? To me, all of that ultimately is a question of how we work together, the InsureTech side and the carrier or the capacity side.
Do you know how you have a pro doing an interview with you is when you do the segue for me between the two topics?
Oh.
What I want to kind of dive into is this idea then of partnerships between carriers and InsureTech companies. And I want to start by, based on what you've seen through those conversations on both the carrier and the InsureTech side, in a utopian space, what would that relationship between carriers and InsureTechs look like? And then we'll get to the idea of what we're actually seeing in practice today.
Yeah.
But let's start with kind of that ideal state.
Yeah. To me, it really does boil down to the speed and quality of decision making on both sides. How engaged are you in the flow of information, in the idea, and are you looking at something and making a decision about it? And then what sort of commitment are you making to it? And I don't just mean dollars, how much you're going to pay for it. That matters. Of course, you have to have a budget for it, but actually what matters so much more than that is the people side of it. So do you have a bought-in sponsor, and are they really engaged? Are you willing to put your people on this project to figure out what are the business requirements? What are the real needs of this? Can we try it out? Can we learn from it? Do we need IT resource or other resources to genuinely engage? And I think anyone who's been in any sort of project, I don't care if it's outsourced or done in-house or whatever, the engagement between those doing the actual work and those who are at the coalface doing the work with the customers or the distributors or whatever, how involved they are, that's what determines a successful project or not. If we're talking about working with an external party in InsureTech, the worst thing we can do is to think of it as a vendor relationship. And I know nobody likes the word vendor. That's someone you pay to do stuff for you. What we want to be is, people talk about a partnership. You want to be a partner. I actually would love to go a step further. And the ideal to me is the line between whether you're part of that organization or this organization is irrelevant. You're part of the same team. And partnership's great. I want it to feel a step further where it's so intertwined. You're not thinking about like, are they one of us or are they one of them? Are they the people we're paying at the end of the day, or are they in this for the same reasons we are? And I think if you can get to that place, which is absolutely possible, that's really the transformative point where you're firing on all cylinders and you're moving forward and your people are engaged. It's beautiful to see that in practice. And I know it probably sounds like, yeah, whatever, that doesn't happen. I've seen it happen. And it's like, it's possible, it's transformative, and the impact of the things that you're trying to do, no question, absolutely elevated. And that's what we all want, right? Better ROI, better customer experience, easier projects that are actually successful, on time, on budget, on scope, all the things that like never seem to happen. You actually can get there, but you have to put something in, and you have to be willing from a relationship standpoint to meet as equals.
I think that like when we talk about this like vendor versus partner paradigm, I think one really important part to keep in mind is that idea of a relationship that you just brought up.
Yeah.
And recognizing that every relationship in your life, whether it's with your spouse or your kids or your coworkers, there are ups and downs in that. And what makes the strength of a relationship is how you work through those things.
Yeah.
So recognizing that a partnership doesn't mean that everything is going to be perfect or there aren't things that you need to work through in that relationship, but that there's like conviction and commitment on both ends of that partnership to work through those challenges. Because like in the world of digital transformation, nothing is without challenge, because if it were easy, we'd all be doing it and we wouldn't be talking about it.
We'd be transformed already.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So then now that we know where we would like to get these relationships and what that ideal win-win relationship would look like, what are you seeing based on the research and some of the surveys that I know you've started to do in this space? What are you seeing as the reality in the market of how these relationship dynamics are working?
Yeah, on the segue, tables are turned, because you set this up really well. So I've been really lucky for the past year or so. I've been working with a group that was spearheaded by the team at InsureTech New York, David and Tony. They're fantastic. There's a whole group of us who came together from different organizations to try to figure out what does good collaboration mean and how do different carriers stack up. And so the idea was put out a survey and ask all these InsureTechs across lots of different pieces of the puzzle, the value chain, tell us about the carriers you've worked with and how has it gone? And so it's totally anonymous. And they told us like carrier X, here's what we did. Here's how it went. Lots of scores on different dimensions. And we got a ton of feedback across the industry, which is beautiful. And we learned a few things about what really matters and a few things that were surprising that don't matter, or it's not that they're without any value, but they weren't statistically significant, which means they're not game changers when it comes to the quality and the success of the initiative. The thing that stands out absolutely as the top, and it's very strongly correlated to the success of the collaboration or the project, we call it the Insurance Collaboration Index. So it's all about framing it as the relationship coming together, as you said. First and foremost, most important was the level of commitment from a sponsorship standpoint. So having a really bought in and engaged sponsor, that was the biggest impactor. And you can understand why, because that, let's say it's the chief claims officer or the chief underwriter or whatever it is, if they're bought in and they're engaged and they're setting that tone and they're showing their people that like, I'm in this and I'm in this full stop, and not just like for the kickoff meeting when there were free bagels or something and then I'm gone and you never hear from me again. I put budget in, I put my time in, and I put my care in, and I'm willing to put my people's time in and stand behind that, knowing there's probably going to be some impact to my organization because people are busy with this thing. That's transformative because it sets the tone right off the bat, and it ensures it's trickle down. You get all the other things you need because the sponsor is genuinely standing behind that. And I've gotten to live that firsthand with some really bought in sponsors who are there for that first meeting, but they're in a really strong way, setting the tone about why this is important, why they care, but then assigning their people to be fully committed as well, putting the right resources in, being willing to give up their best people to talk about the business requirements and to do the pilots and to keep showing up for those meetings to say, this matters and I want to hear from you, good and bad. So that there's a lot more detail behind it, but that first and foremost was the most transformative. And the second one, exactly to your point, Emma, is things don't always go well, and that's fine. Like the stories I put in the books, they're not all everything was perfect and that's why it's such a great story because it all worked out fine. No, there's no lessons in that. I mean, some, but not really. The learning is when things get gritty. And so what we found is it's not the absence of problems, it's the way you solve for those problems. So invariably, you're going to meet some kind of roadblock or complication or difficulty. How you navigate that, how you problem solve, how quickly you're willing to kind of right the ship or make a turn or make a fast decision in the right way to fix that problem and put resource behind that change, that's critical. And that makes perfect sense. Not every project goes well. The way you engage to solve the problems, that's a huge impactor on success. So like bought-in sponsor, problem solving on the fly, collaboratively as a partner, those were the two things that were the most correlated to success. I share something that's not correlated because it blew my mind, and that's dollars. I think it's really easy to just assume, oh, you throw a lot of money at it, and you hear the budgets for some of the systems, and we spent all this money, and it was double the budget, and we're still not happy with it. That's a sign. Like you budgeted 50 million, you spent 100 million, and everyone's still groaning. It's not the money you threw at it. That's not the defining factor for success. And so we see that even tight budgets, even difficulty in spending, that doesn't mean it's not going to succeed. And people who are throwing money at the problem, but not necessarily having the buy-in of the sponsor, maybe still being difficult in how fast and effective they are at solving the problems that come up. You can't just throw a bunch of SIs at increasing budgets and expect that's going to solve the problem. You have to really engage. Budget and willingness to spend were not correlated with success. And I think that's a great reminder for us as an industry as we think about change. A lot of people get scared and like, budgets, we can't afford this. That has nothing to do with it. You can do this stuff effectively. You can do it efficiently, cost efficiently, cost effectively, and still get somewhere if you're willing to put the dedication into it from your people standpoint and be a partner in solving the problems. It's not about being too expensive.
And there's a reason that when I talk about transformation as a whole and where success comes from, that I focus so much on the people side of things. And starting with those very foundational change management principles of having a very clear vision and why that's articulated across the company, communicating throughout. And it's so that you can move past challenges that you come across quickly because you've got a communication strategy that's put in place to help you effectively navigate that stuff. But that idea of an engaged sponsor who's there, not necessarily day in, day out in the trenches, but at least invested in the success and, for lack of a better term, eating their own dog food and not just throwing it off to their team.
Yeah.
Because you're going to have more collaboration. You're going to be able to dedicate your time to problems that arise. And then ultimately, when it comes time to adopt that solution, you're going to get higher adoption quicker than you would have without that sponsorship and that dedication across the board within the organization. So I am secretly very happy that was what was found in the survey, because it just helps me double down on kind of that idea behind where I think success actually lies. Like, if you choose the right technology, it's going to do its job.
Yeah.
Even when you've chosen the right technology, if all the other parts of it aren't working in the right direction, you're going to end up spending more money and still not being happy with it.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. And so one of the things I say is, like, people get frustrated with me because I don't tell them, like, this is the technology you need or choose this vendor or whatever. Like, I don't think any of that matters. There is a better answer for every question you face, but I don't care about that, because you can make all the right decisions on everything and still fail miserably, because, like, those are not the relevant things to figure out. What's relevant is to figure out, how are we going to support any of these changes, and how are we bought in culturally, resource wise? Do we genuinely care? And do, if you're the leader, do my people understand that I care? Am I role modeling that? And that's not a once and done kind of thing. You don't just do that at your annual kickoff meeting. Like, you got to be there every time and show them that this matters. If you do that, then pick what you need to pick, and it'll be so much better. And that's why I see the same solution at very similar looking carriers. One of them flounders, one of them takes off, and it's all the same players. You just swapped out the carriers, and you look into it. It's one of them was like, we bought this from them. They're doing this for us. The other ones, we're building something together. Exact same solution. It's a totally different engagement. And that's what collaboration ultimately is about. And that's where success comes from.
And even being on the technology side, I would argue some of that comes from, again, that partnership question that we were talking about before. And what does your software vendor or partner in this scenario view their role? Going back to what you said, do they think of themselves as a part of your team helping you accomplish something? Yeah. Or do they see the delivery as a box that needs to be checked because they do this all the time and they know what's right?
Yeah.
At the end of the day, every implementation is going to look a little different based off of the nuances and the differentiation within that carrier. And so it is a two-way street. I don't want carriers to feel like we're just saying, like, it all comes down to your dedication to this, but also finding partners that are committed to helping you move through that is a really important part of the equation. And oftentimes that goes beyond just what technology they have to offer and the people that make up that organization as well.
Yeah, and that's like, the RFP process is not just done in paper. Successful one, it's like a job interview. Both sides have to want to work together. It's not one-sided. You got to have the right fit. And maybe it's, look, they're going to challenge us and push us to grow, and that's fantastic. But if they're just going to tell us we're wrong all the time and we're too stuck in our ways, and that's not going to work as much as it's not going to work for us telling them that they don't understand. And it has to be collaborative. You have to want to be there together.
So we could probably keep going for a while, Bryan.
Yes.
But in the sake of keeping everybody's interest, can you tell everybody what they should do if they're interested in learning a little bit more about this topic so that they can kind of stay engaged?
The Insurance Collaboration Index itself is already out there, and we'll be putting out some stuff on the results of that, but that's insurancecollaborationindex.com. I mentioned there's another book in the works, and it's tied to this, just in the early days of it, but getting together some case studies of some of these collaborations between an InsureTech and a carrier, and lots of different kinds of InsureTechs, lots of different kinds of carriers. So no one gets the excuse of being like, oh, there's no one like us, so this doesn't count. It counts. So that's going to be the third volume of the Future of Insurance series. I think it's going to be called The Collaborators. We'll see. But if people go to future-of-insurance.com/collaboration, you can sign up for updates, and we'll keep you posted. It's going to come out next year, so 2023.
And I will, of course, put some of that in the YouTube description as well. And at the very least, make sure, if you're not already, to follow this guy, check his podcasts, and stay up to date with what's happening in the world of future of insurance. But thank you so much for joining me, Bryan. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And I hope everyone has a wonderful day.
Thanks, Emma.
Thank you so much for joining me for this episode of Leading Change. If you liked what you saw, be sure to subscribe and come back weekly for more expert interviews on digital transformation, change management, and emerging technologies.